Hi, everybody, and welcome back. This is Whisper, and this is another episode of our first season. And if you take a look at the screen, and I'm hoping that it's all working. We are having a few technical issues we had last week and this week, so I'm hoping that you'll see everything on screens. If not, just realize that I have Kirsten Gabini back with me. So, Kirsten, welcome back.
Thank you, Rory.
Absolutely. And as everybody can see, we have a guest with us, Amir Freiman. And Amir is going to be sharing his insights and his thoughts regarding his whisper with us today. But before I get to Amir, and welcome Amir, please make yourself comfortable. We're in for a wonderful journey together this morning, I'm sure. And before I get to Amir, what we're going to do is just quickly welcome those of you that are the first-time viewers of Whisper. If you've been with us before, you kind of have the understanding. If you haven't, you're going to be wondering, what is Whisper? What are these individuals about? What is the space about? So what I'm going to ask is I'm going to hand over to Kirsten. I'm going to ask Kirsten if she can just briefly share kind of the philosophy behind what Whisper is about and why her and I do this.
Thank you, Rory. So a long time ago, I read this quote by Rumi that I think a lot of people must have read or come across the way. And it says there something about what you are seeking is also seeking you. And I think that's at the heart of what the Whisper is about. We are listening for something that we are seeking and that is seeking us. And so I'm very excited to have Amir with us today. I was part of a conversation that I heard. I listened to a conversation that he was part of a few months ago. And I really loved the way that he clearly hears what we call the whisper. I wonder what he calls it. I'm interested to hear that. And also what he's seeking and what he believes is seeking him. So that's really what we're looking at today. So thank you so much for being with us, Amir.
Thank you. Thank you, Rory and Kirsten. It's a pleasure being with you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So for the viewers who have not had the opportunity or the privilege to have interacted or met with Amir or looked at any of his works, Amir Freiman is the co-founder of the Israeli Education and Spirit Movement. So Amir also attended medical school in Israel and got right up until 5th year and then decided he wanted to go and seek other adventures and left and ended up in a Zen monastery in Japan for about 2 years and then spent 20 years in the US in a spiritual community and is now back in Israel. And we'll get into a little bit of that a little bit later in the discussions that we're going to have today. And that's just a very brief introduction to Amir and his life journey. In that process, he also published the book Spiritual Transmissions, Paradoxes and Dilemmas on the Spiritual Path. Quite an interesting, I've actually not had the opportunity to read the full book. I have ordered it as well. I think Kirsten has as well. One of the key things around the book that kind of spoke to me was it's a study in the relationship between a guru or a spiritual teacher and the student and how that relationship can kind of shape the teachings and the learnings that both parties go through. So for the viewers, I'm going to also have in the description of the video all of Amir's details in terms of his social media presence. And in terms of you being able to get more information, you can just click in the description and you'll find it below. So excellent. Welcome, Amir, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The first question that we usually get started with, and I'm going to stick with the tradition, I'm going to ask you, how does the whisper show up in your life in terms of what we've explained to you, our understanding of the whisper?
Well, I want to start by saying I think it's a wonderful question, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful question because the effect it has on me is point me to the more subtle or delicate and inner um, impressions, sensations, experiences, voices, and it pulls me as if to, I thought of a different metaphor, whisper, which I'd like to suggest, which is that the image I had when I thought about it was of a very fine stream of air bubbles coming from the bottom of the ocean, rising up to the surface. So it's when it starts at the bottom of the ocean in a space that is completely dark and still, you just see a very fine string of tiny, tiny bubbles come up to the surface. They gradually become bigger and bigger until when they get close to the surface, there's a lot of locomotion there, and then they burst at the surface. And what this metaphor, if I explain it a little bit, it's like we see in our lived kind of sensual body experience and thoughts, we see the bubbles bursting to the surface and appearing, and we see all the locomotion and dynamics on the surface. And then as we put our attention below the surface and lower to where that string of bubbles comes from, we as if sink into where everything starts,
Wow.
and in ourselves and in our experience and in reality. And that is really what I would say that my whisper, or what's calling me in my life, is to dive as deep as I can to the source of that string of air bubbles in that metaphor, or to where the whisper comes from, where it, and you see the whisper when it first appears. My impression is that it's contentless.
Wow.
It's pure. It's very subtle, very delicate, and without any specific content. And then as it comes out, or as it comes into life, into reality, into my consciousness, into the world, and it meets and mingles with my personality and conditioning and senses and body and thinking and feeling, then it gets specific content and color and taste and flavor, and it manifests in a way that is more unique and specific to this fellow Amir Freiman. But the more I go to where it comes from, the less content and the more essence I find, and that's really my calling, is to go to follow to follow the source of that whisper, or the source of those air bubbles at the bottom of the ocean, and you see, I feel that in order to do that, first, maybe the first thing is to recognize what it is in me that is attracted to that source, because it seems to me that it's not part of my personality, that in me which is attracted to the source of the whisper or the appearance of all phenomenon, is of the same essence, contentless, maybe qualityless. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I'm
Sure.
still not sure about it.
Yes.
Um, but it's something in me which is non-different than the source of that whisper and wants to meet that source and go to the bottom of where it's coming from. And the other thing about it is that it, in order to be able to go that far or that deep into reality or myself, I need to become refined. I need to become more subtle, more sensitive, more in tune with the subtlest and most refined and almost transparent dimensions of my experience and of reality.
Almost contentless, like you
Almost,
defined it.
almost contentless and maybe almost characterless or qualityless. I mean, I'm not sure because my experience of diving or of going deep into that source is that there is dynamism there, so it's alive. It's not a
Yes.
static or it's not still. It's actually very dynamic.
Okay.
That there is something profoundly positive. So when some people describe it as love, I know what I think I know what they are talking about
Okay.
as the most positive emotional or uh, content or quality. And in some mysterious way, I sense that it's also intelligent.
Okay.
So, so, but maybe it's because I haven't gone deep enough. Maybe these qualities appear as this whisper comes into the world, and maybe at that stage when it's only quality and no without any content yet, it already has some qualities that are relevant to us as human beings. So maybe already at that stage, it already meets our humanity. And there it manifests as life, positivity, or love, and intelligence. Maybe if I go deeper into it, and some mystics have reported that when you go all the way to the bottom, there's nothing there. There's just this essence which has no content and no qualities, and from which everything appears. So I feel I'm on my way there,
Mm.
and that's where my heart is pulling me.
Amir, I wonder if I could ask you, you talk about this beautiful metaphor of the ocean that I'm very grateful that you shared. It's opened up my imagination very deeply. Um, and I understand that we can only really use metaphors to talk about this deep place that you describe so eloquently. But it makes me want to ask you to what extent we ourselves are living metaphors of this meeting of consciousness and flesh.
Can you say a little bit more about what do you mean by the meeting place?
So our expression of that essence in itself carries a flavor of the pre-condition inexplicable, and in itself becomes almost like a living metaphor then. Um, and the subtlety that you speak of playing out through us as a prism almost of that light,
Yes.
or are we trying to take the prism away completely? I'm sorry if my
No,
language is clumsy, but I haven't thought about this like this before.
I understand. I understand. So we are talking here about the question that is endlessly intriguing for me, which is the relationship between the ground of being or the source or where everything comes from and the very specific and unique manifestations in multitude of forms and colors and flavors in reality. And what is the relationship between the two? I would say my conclusion from also from meeting different spiritual masters and well-known exemplars of different traditions, that there is always flavor. There is always a personal flavor. There is always our biological, psychological, and cultural conditioning, the language that we use, the metaphors, the experiences, everything that makes us a unique individual always comes into play. There's no way around it. So, but the more one is attuned to or puts their attention or heart or whatever it is that kind of we can put in that toward the source, the more refined and beautiful and universal their expression of that whisper is in human, in the human world. And also that maybe that's where those few characteristics that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Maybe, and we can add some more. We could add beauty, we can add freedom, a sense of expansion, a sense of connection. All these are already human manifestations or human expressions. They're just much more universal than, in my case, I have to think about these things in Hebrew because that's my language. And when I dream about, when I have depth dreams, they are in Hebrew. I can't help it. That's the way my mind works. So obviously, and I'm a man, so I imagine, I'm sure, I know for sure that the manifestation of that whisper in my personality is affected by the fact that I'm man, that I'm Jewish, that I was born in '58, etc., etc. Nothing wrong, or I would even say that's part of the beauty of it, is that there are so many varied different manifestations of that one source or one whisper as it is interpreted, and it cannot appear in any other way but be interpreted by each of us according to our different conditioning and whatever makes us a unique individual.
Sure. In terms of your interpretation of the reality that we find ourselves in, and I just wanted to know, currently there's a popular view in the metaphysical circles and also in the and kind of in the quantum physics circles that the reality that we find ourselves in is an illusion, and that it's all just energy. Do you think that kind of speaks to the philosophy and your understanding of the source and where the whisper comes from?
I could probably make somehow the connection, but I'm not that familiar with that perspective. I don't understand fully what it means. I mean, my dog seems to be experiencing a lot of the same, to be sharing a lot of the same reality that I live in. And we have quite a lively interaction.
Yes.
So, so so on what level is it? So what I think if I think about, I relate to what you're suggesting also as another metaphor. So are you does it mean that reality comes from energy, and then when it meets our senses, how does it how does
Yes.
it become a solid reality?
A solid. That's exactly it. And to the question that Kirsten asked just now is how does that so what we could actually see is, in my interpretation of what you were saying, we could even see the table that I'm sitting at is the manifestation of a whisper at the moment that it actually hits our senses. Exactly what you were saying there. So everything before that is almost like an energy illusion, and even the solid state that it enters into, it's still just energy, but our senses pick it up as solid.
Hmm.
But it's
Yeah.
its expression of the whisper. And I was just wondering if that's what you were kind of getting at, or not.
Well, I can tell you, I tell you where it meets me. I wrote a poem like 30 something years ago when I was in the Zen monastery,
Yes.
and it came out of contemplating the relationship of the world of matter and the world of animals to that source versus my own relationship. So I don't remember that poem exactly, but I remember the spirit of it was everything is kind of pulled into that source. The table, the trees, the animals, everything in some way is kind of converging or aiming toward the source of everything. And when you speak of energy, I have I have a sense of a vibration that is like permeating everything.
Okay.
So I can imagine that very subtle, all pervasive kind of vibration is something that my human experience, in my central experience, I can relate to, and that there, even if I go into more and more subtle levels of that vibration,
Yeah.
you would arrive at pure energy before it meets anything that starts vibrating when it meets it. So there's something in my experience that kind of relates, I think, to the metaphor or to the um, paradigm that you were suggesting. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely
Yes.
does. So thank you.
Amir, can I ask you? I know you've interviewed so many spiritual exemplars, and I'd love to know what is your favorite question to ask them um, for your own kind of juicy enjoyment of what they're busy doing that you love so much.
My favorite question is what is happening right now?
Oh, okay, tell us more.
Well, I didn't know that. So just to give the context, I'm doing a PhD research. I'm already about a year into it, and the title of the research, or of my PhD thesis, is Living Transcendence: A Phenomenological Study of Spiritual Exemplars. So I'm trying, by interviewing living exemplars of different traditions and spiritual paths, to understand what it's like to live on what Abraham Maslow called a high spiritual plateau. No longer having peaks of spiritual experiences, fleeting, temporary spiritual experiences or mystical experience, but actually living on a high spiritual plateau, which I called living transcendence. And so I've been interviewing, I interviewed about 20 such exemplars so far, from all over the world. different traditions. And I'm going to interview probably another 10 or 15, in the next few months. And I didn't know that. Initially, I intended to travel around the world and spend a few weeks with each of these individuals, which would have been fantastic. But then the corona started.
Yeah.
And, I had to. I at this point have no choice but to do the interviews by Zoom. And to me, that was like, oh no, so I wanted so much to see how these people live their life and interact with other people, and with, how they behave when they go to a coffee shop, or when they sit for dinner, or when they talk with their students. And now I can't. And so it was like, oh, I will be so limited in the information I can obtain. But I'm discovering I get so much information from looking at them during the interview, and I get to spend something between 4 and 6 hours with each of them over 3-4 interviews, and I try as much as I can to direct them to explore their current experience, which they have not fully processed yet. So I'm very interested in their preconceptual or minimally conceptualized experience. And I'm very interested to see how they connect to their experience and verbalize it, and find ways to communicate it to me freshly, as they are interacting with it in their own experience. So that's what I'm trying to get. That's what interests me most. And then, very interesting, I think I see on not only on their words, but on their hesitations, their eye movement, their facial expressions, their stillness, their bursts of energy. And often I would ask them, so what's happening now as you're describing this to me? What do you do in order to connect with yourself and communicate that to me? And I love what's happening in those interviews. So they're very rich and full, and I'm enjoying them tremendously.
It sounds incredible. The opportunity to be able to meet exemplars in a field, it speaks to me so fully, because spirituality and just improving oneself is such a key foundation of my life. So it sounds like heaven to me.
Yes.
My question to you is, in terms of you trying to understand this living transcendence, how does that tie into the cultivation of vegetables?
You mean because I have a vegetable garden?
Yes.
Yes. Well, first I need to tell you that about a year ago, we planted about 50 trees, fruit trees, in the orchard behind. So we created a very nice orchard behind our house.
Beautiful.
And so I have a vegetable garden, I have an orchard. I'm building a big gazebo in the center of the orchard so that we can hang out there, And
we're coming to visit you.
Yes. And I'm enjoying it a lot. And it's an interesting question, which I haven't really thought much about. So now you have an opportunity to watch me trying to connect with, something I haven't really thought very deeply about. So I know that I love going to work in the field, or in my veggie garden, and I can't really think of my life without it. So it has a very important, it fulfills some very important function for me. I want to say something additional to mentioning that I have a veggie garden and an orchard, which is that I live after traveling around the world for about 40 years or so. A few years ago, my wife and I settled down on the very same land that I grew up in.
Okay.
So my parents are farmers, and so we asked their permission to build a small house on the land. So I live now on the very same soil that I ran around naked when I was 1 or 2 years old. And I know the texture and the temperature and the humidity of that soil like I know my own body.
Wow.
So there is something very sensual and emotional that connects me with this land. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily feel the same if I lived someplace else. I don't know.
Wow. I have to say, it sounds like you've got quite serious roots.
Yeah. So maybe that's maybe that word roots is connected to this question, which is, you see, as I'm going, and I am throughout my life going into that nothingness from which everything appears, or I don't know if to call it nothingness, but contentless, characterless source of everything. Maybe I need, for my own sanity and stability and well-being as a human being, to be grounded and have and feel very strongly my roots. So just to mention that I also do weightlifting. I go for long walks. I love to feel my body. And to me, actually, my morning practice, I start with physical exercise.
Wow.
And I love to kind of work out. So even to the point of exhaustion before I sit down to meditate, because there is something about being in my body in such a way that helps me go deeper into my meditation. I don't, as you can tell, I don't have a framework kind of philosophy to explain the connection, but my experience tells me there is such a connection between being rooted in my body, in the land, in nature, in my relationship with other people around me. So I live next door to my dad, and we go for walks together, and I live next door, and my sister and her kids live next door. So there's something about actually being very much here that I feel enables me to venture this far into the emptiness at the source.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking us on that little journey of discovery.
Very inspiring, and it makes me think of origin. There's a kind of origin point, and that's very powerful. That from that origin, there's the opportunity to do such deep expansion.
Yeah.
Amir, I wanted to ask you about interviewing spiritual exemplars, and I know that one of the practices that many teachers encourage is that we see everybody as a spiritual exemplar and teacher. And for me, that's been extremely challenging at times. But it's something that I try to keep alive in my consciousness. And I was wondering how you've journeyed across that. Seeing everybody as a potential teacher, and then really having exposure to, if I can say, real or acknowledged exemplars, and what is that interplay done between the ordinary exemplar and the acknowledged exemplar?
Very interesting question. Thank you for that. Well, you see, I think there is truth to that saying, that you can, anybody and everybody and everything, or anybody and anything can teach you or can be your teacher. And it's a big capital letter and, we learn more from people that we have intimate relationships with and long-term relationships with. So while that there is truth to that saying, but not everything is the same. And also, I think if I wanted to obviously learn to play the piano, I would go to somebody who knows how to play the piano well to teach me. Or if I wanted to play tennis or whatever, if I wanted to be a good farmer, I would probably go and seek advice from somebody who has worked the land for the last 50 years, like my dad. And I'm learning so much from him. So spiritual exemplars are people that, for whatever reason, we feel are inspiring and that maybe we have a little sense of that there is something in them that we would like to emulate. We would like in some way to be somewhat like them. Maybe we even admire them a little bit. Maybe there is a sense of awe, and this is really incredible. You see, so and people, when the first step of my research was I wrote emails to 300 people that I consider experts in the spiritual and religious field from all over the world. So a lot of them were scholars who study religion and spirituality, but also interviewers, people like yourself, who interview different people and get to know a lot of people on the spiritual path, and magazine editors and long-term spiritual aspirants or seekers. And I asked them, do you have spiritual exemplars in your life, or have you had, or do you have spiritual exemplars in your life? If you do or have had such people, would you please describe them to me and tell me what it is about them that makes them exemplary? So I wasn't just relying on my own biased view, unavoidably biased, of what is a spiritual exemplar. I wanted to get as broad and varied picture as possible of what different people consider to be a spiritual exemplar. And I received some very interesting and unexpected responses. I can tell you one thing, that most people related to exemplars that they personally had the opportunity to know and spend time with. So some people, that you would expect naturally the Dalai Lama, the Bishop Tutu, Eckhart Tolle, there are some Deepak Chopra. There are some people that everybody knows and recognizes as maybe spiritual exemplars. I hardly received any of those in the recommendations, and I received recommendations or nomination of about 200 exemplars, and most of them were not high up there, but people that those experts personally knew and could relate to, including people, somebody told me, a few people actually told me that a close family member, like their mother or their father or a sister, had a profound spiritual effect on them and on their life. And they said, one of them, who is a professor in University of Religion, said, I contemplated your question for a long time, and I cannot but be objectively acknowledge that my sister and my father are my spiritual exemplars.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Isn't it?
So beautiful, touching.
And like yesterday, I interviewed somebody, an American woman, that the person who recommended me to her said she's not a teacher, she's not well known at all, but she has been pursuing with incredible commitment her spiritual path for the last 40 years. And I don't know anybody who is as seriously dedicated and committed to following their intuition and practice and make small steps and progress consistently throughout her life as that woman. So she's my exemplar this is very far away from, the Dalai Lama or Deepak Chopra, but it's and I was so impressed with her when I interviewed her yesterday. It was our first interview, and I was actually very deeply moved by her description of how. I'll give you an example, which I was very touched by. I asked, she described how she has been following her sense of her attraction, her pull to the divine over, her whole adult life, over the last 40 years or so. And how she made a lot of sacrifices along the way in order to be able to do that. And then I asked her, have you had any episodes which you would consider the dark night of the soul, like where you lost direction, you didn't know what up and what's down, what's forward and what's backward? And she hesitated for a second and said, "This is my experience all the time."
Wow.
Wow. And she explained that, and I was very moved. She said, in order to move forward, I constantly have to leave that which is more familiar to me and where I feel more comfortable, and throw myself into something which is less comfortable and more unknown. So my experience is, in a way, I'm constantly in the dark night of the soul. Fear is my companion, but I've already learned that, while most people pull back in the face of fear, I need to walk into it. That it's actually my relationship to fear is such that I embrace it and I welcome it as my way forward. So this is incredible. I think this is like a very exemplary spiritual exemplar to me.
Sure.
Profound.
That's an incredible story. Thank you very much. Kirsten and Amir, just cognizant of the time. And
Yes.
we are getting to the end of our time together.
Unfortunately.
And I think we're going
Amir is going to come and visit us in South Africa.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And we're gonna have to have you back. Yeah, there's so many other topics that I'd like to cover.
Thank you.
So,
I know.
yeah.
I am enjoying speaking with you. So you're asking very good questions, which to me a good question is 95% of the answer, as they say.
Yeah.
I agree.
So thank you very much for allowing us to go on this journey with you, Amir. Kirsten, once again, thanks a million. Incredible questions. And yes, we will definitely have you back. And to the viewers, thank you for joining us. Again, I'm going to finish off by saying this is the caliber of the individuals that we're interviewing. Mind-blowing. People that really, in their own way, can take you and make you think of life differently. And thank you very much. Just there's a subscribe button down at the bottom. Please press it. There's the like button and there's the bell if you want notifications as well. So please do follow the ritual. And especially if it's your first time with us and you haven't subscribed already, please do. And from my side, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much, Amir, for joining us. And Kirsten.
Yes, I'm already missing Amir before we even said goodbye. I feel as though this was way too short and I would love to hear more. And so I look forward to our next encounter and certainly to having you back, having you in South Africa. We would love to do that, and I certainly extend a sincere invitation. Thank you.
Come and see my orchard and veggie garden.
Absolutely.
I would love to.
It's like a trade. You come to us and we'll come to you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
God bless.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. And
bye. Thank you.
The viewers, we'll see you at the next Whisper. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.